Hey, welcome back. In my previous video on Sodom and Gomorrah, I sort of casually remarked that the biblical book of Leviticus forbids anal sex between men. Not that it was my intent, but a lot of Christian and Jewish homophobes would agree with me on that. It's just they go a lot further than what the text says.
You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination. This is one of the Old Testament passages speaking about homosexuality.
Leviticus 18 and the laws in the Torah concerning forbidden sexual relations, among which includes, of course, the commandment to not commit homosexuality.
Well, we're not really sure, they say, what God says about homosexuality. You turn to this passage. I don't think it's that hard to figure out.
Leviticus, of course, does not say do not be homosexual or God forbids homosexuality, at least not in so many words. But these Jewish and Christian homophobes hear that anyway. So the question becomes, what choices do these readers make to hear what they want to hear in the Mosaic Law? That God forbids homosexuality for everybody. Let's ask a few critical questions in this episode of Sounds Like BS, Leviticus 18 and 20. First of all, what are we looking at here? Leviticus is one of the books of the Torah, or the 5 books of Moses. The Torah carries hundreds of commandments meant to guide behavior in ancient Israel. But of course, modern Jewish groups, and even a few Christian groups, look to the Torah to guide their own behavior now. The 10 Commandments are in there, but so are about 600 other ones. So what do readers think Leviticus says about homosexuality? At verse 18:22, Yahweh tells Israel, "And you will not lie with a male like with a woman. It is an offense." The you here is masculine because the intended audience of most of the laws is basically Israelite dudes. Women can learn the law from their husbands, I guess. Another variant appears 2 chapters later in the language of case law. "And if a man lies with a male the layings of a woman, the two of them have committed an offense. They will surely be put to death. Their blood is on them." So it's actually a capital offense, like adultery or perjury or working on Saturdays. First, let's parse out what the laws say and do not say, and then we'll look at them in context. First of all, the word I've translated as an offense is often rendered abomination, even in modern translations, which is a bit dramatic. I mean, I sin all the time, but I almost never commit abominations. Since it's not 1604, I've gone with a less loaded translation. As Friedman and Delansky highlight in their book, The Bible Now, dudes sleeping with dudes is an offensive act, not an especially evil sin against God. But what is the offense? The laws don't literally condemn homosexuality, or we would read something like, "You will not be gay." They seem to condemn a specific sex act, and religious leaders try to draw larger conclusions through their own logic and reasoning. One condemns lying with a male like with a woman, and the other lying with a male the layings of a woman. Lying with someone is a biblical euphemism for sex, and the root of our expression getting laid. The expression is generally used of sex between men and women, and lying with someone seems to involve phallic penetration since it can consummate a marriage and often leads to pregnancy. So the usual logic is that if lying with a woman means vaginally penetrating her with a penis, then lying with a man like with a woman means penetrating him, in this case anally. A specific sex act is forbidden, not an entire sexual orientation. Here's what I mean by that, since there are many who uncritically jump from one to the other. The Torah has dozens of restrictions on straight sex, including of specific sex acts. For example, having sex with a woman while she's menstruating. Yet no one concludes that the Torah condemns heterosexuality. By contrast, the Torah condemns one homoerotic sex act, and they conclude that God condemns all homosexuality. That's a glaring inconsistency in their logic. And it continues. Many Christian churches forbid specific sex acts to straight couples, like anal sex, oral sex, toys, bondage, you name it. But again, despite all these condemnations of heteroerotic sex acts, they don't condemn heterosexuality. They just disapprove of certain sexual practices. But with Leviticus, we would have to use a completely different logic for male anal sex as some sort of symbol for all homosexual behavior. Not everyone reasons this way. Conservative Judaism, for example, often recognizes gay couples, but discourages male couples from having anal sex so they can be compliant with the law in Leviticus. Everything else is fine. Now, to be fair, Friedman and Delansky point out that the word for lanes is plural, so it's possible to read all sexual activity between men into the plural. Again, though, this is a possibility, not a certainty. Readers have to choose to interpret the plural this way, and they'll probably only do that if they already think that sex between men is bad. Furthermore, in the ancient Greek translation of Leviticus, the one used by New Testament writers like Paul, the lanes are singular, the lane. The ancient Jewish translators didn't keep the plural as a grammatical sign to bilingual Jews, and they didn't come up with a Greek phrase that would be equivalent to the meaning that Friedman and Delansky allow. So what Leviticus most likely forbids is anal sex between men. One may choose to infer that a ban on all sexual activity, or even all romantic activity between men is implied, but it's not actually in the text. The language of these laws focuses very narrowly on men sleeping with men, but Christian pastors tend to add to the law even further by throwing in lesbians. Hearing lesbians and a law that has so much to do with men obviously doesn't come from the text, but from our modern paradigm of sexuality. In this binary model, all people are either straight or gay. That's why we sort of discount or ignore bisexual, pansexual, or asexual people. We have to fit them somewhere. Since lesbians and gay men both fit into the category of homosexual, we tend to lump them together. Ancient people tended not to categorize people by orientation, an idea that doesn't fully develop until the 1800s anyway, but rather by who was involved or what they were doing. For example, Christian penitential texts pair gay male couples with straight couples because both are capable of having anal sex. Lesbians are irrelevant to that discussion. It's entirely typical of ancient sexual ethics to develop strong and clear restrictions on male homoeroticism and to ignore lesbians altogether. It's like movies in the 90s, where every actress had to at least make out with another woman at some point, but Will Smith wouldn't allow the camera to show him physically kissing a man even when he was playing a gay character, because he thought it would end his career. Turning again to Friedman and Delansky, ancient Israel was a polygamous culture. Wealthy men could have as many wives as they could afford. You know, like the biblical heroes, Abraham and Jacob and Moses and David. Straight men with multiple women sex partners are not about to forbid homoerotic activity between women. It's like free life porn. Lesbian sex is not really treated by the rabbis until the Talmud in the Middle Ages, where again, unmarried lesbians are lumped together with unmarried straight couples since both involve women. Even more telling, a man living with an unmarried woman makes her a prostitute, but a woman living with another woman and playing with her is merely obscene. No violation of the law, even if the rabbis disapprove. The jump from God forbids anal sex between men to God forbids all homosexuality is not as tiny or as necessary as some preachers make it sound. You can forbid anal sex without forbidding everything to everyone. But some people choose to add to the law, taking a commandment against a specific sex act and through their own reasoning, opt to believe that when God says anal sex, he means all romantic activity between men, and when God says men, he means men and women. That's putting a lot of words in God's mouth, I would think. But let's assume you choose to make these leaps. The question now is, who actually cares? There are some Jewish and Christian interpreters who recognize the dignity of LGBTQ people and who want to cordon off these laws by arguing that they're irrelevant in a modern context. First of all, they say, the law appears in the Holiness Code, a sort of text within the text that outlines how ancient Israel should be distinct, separate, or to use a fancy old word, holy, from the Egyptians and the Canaanites. In fact, chapter 18 begins, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am your God Yahweh. You will not do as they do in the land of Egypt where you lived, and you will not do as they do in the land of Canaan to which I'm bringing you. You will not follow their statutes. You will observe my ordinances and you will keep my statutes and follow them. I am your God Yahweh." And, just to drive the point home, you will keep my statutes and my ordinances. One will live by doing so. I am Yahweh. In other words, the stated purpose of the laws in chapter 18, including the prohibition against anal sex, is to distinguish the Israelites from outsiders. Since we're not ancient Israelites in danger of mixing with Canaanites, the holiness code isn't relevant anymore. Or so the argument goes. At the very least, we can point out that these rules are presented as strictly insider rules for Israelites, not universal ones for everybody. God doesn't ask them to stop Canaanites from having anal sex, just don't do it yourselves. In other words, if Christian and Jewish men don't want to have anal sex with each other, or if they even want to denounce homosexual relationships in their churches or synagogues, then they can do that and be in line with Leviticus. But there's no obligation to force other people outside of their churches and synagogues to follow these commandments, even sticking to the strict letter of the law. The text says these rules are specifically for members only. Otherwise, narrowly historicizing the text so none of these commandments apply to anyone anymore just isn't going to get gay allies very far. Reading the Torah non-literally so you can apply it to later historical contexts is just too common a reading choice. So a few years ago, memes like this were going around. It highlights the hypocrisy of getting a tattoo of Leviticus 18:22, presumably with the homophobic intent of accusing gay people of going against God's will by breaking one of his laws, in a medium that in itself breaks one of God's laws. Tattoos are forbidden in Leviticus, right between the two laws against homoerotic anal sex. Yet tattoos appear all over the bodies of Catholics, Protestants, and evangelicals. Hell, Christians get commemorative tattoos when they go on pilgrimages to Israel. So clearly they don't care about Leviticus 19:28. Then why do they care about 18:22? One reason is selective historicism. The law against tattoos was for ancient Israel. The law against anal sex is eternal. Why? Who knows? The bigger reason is that many Christian churches completely ignore the laws of the Torah, accept the 10 Commandments, and sometimes they don't even bother with those. Christians work on Saturdays, eat pork, wear blended fabrics, plant different crops in the same field, and then reap those fields to the edge instead of leaving some for the poor. All of these are violations of the law, and Christians just don't care. So again, why suddenly care about 2 random commandments in Leviticus? The simple answer is, 'cause they wanna. If you think gay people are bad, you'll pay attention to these 2 verses in a book you don't usually bother with. It conveniently justifies an opinion you already have. You can ignore the law while munching on a ham and cheese sandwich, but you don't like queer people and there's a law that helps you justify that? That one's important. It's pointless to argue that Leviticus has nothing to say about homosexuality because people will find it there if they want to. But this reading requires homophobes to make choices. They have to choose to hear a prohibition of anal sex between men, a very specific sex act, as a prohibition of all romantic activity between 2 men or between 2 women, when women are quite clearly excluded from the discussion. Rhetorically, they often choose an antiquated translation of a word that basically means an offense, so you get really scared about it. They also have to choose to think that laws meant to distinguish ancient Israelite and Canaanite cultures are somehow relevant today, although again, this is a very common choice to make. And finally, Christian readers, by far the majority, have to choose to cherry pick 2 laws from a list of hundreds, not because they think the law applies to them, but because it justifies an opinion they already have. They are, of course, free to make these choices, but then again, you're free to make different ones.